So let's talk a little bit about fears, because one of the things that prevents a lot of white people from getting involved in anti-racism work is fear, being afraid of what might happen. So what are some of the fears that white people might have, both on a personal level and on like a public level? So like interpersonal, but also like in a bigger level.
Jason, you tell us.
I mean, I was actually in this liberation logic training with Rebecca Mintz and Aaron Goggins and two people I really respect. And you know, there were like 40 people in it and there was one other white guy. And that's something I would like to speak a lot more to, the fact that like there's so few men in this work, and particularly white men. And at one point it came up, it's like, we don't want to be the villain, you know? And that's something that I've, sit with and that you just sort of have to get past, is that you have this power and privilege and you have to be willing to implicate yourself in the systemic, and you have to be willing to move through, or you have to be willing to take it, you know? I mean, that's honest. It's like the amount of like, you know, yeah, there are definitely times where I've had my feelings hurt. I was talking to Myron and Rochelle earlier, like, been called names, but, you know, all kinds of things, and it's like, it's nothing compared to actual institutional racism, you know? So I think the fragility piece is huge, and yeah, it's important to understand power dynamics and be willing to be honest with yourself about what they are.
That's difficult for a lot of people, right? Any other responses to that?
Yeah, I'm in a moment where I'm doing a bunch of reading again, and I'm in the middle of a few books that actually talk about whiteness. And there's actually a passage in Eloquent Rage. How many folks have read that book? Reading Cooper's work? Yeah, she's a phenomenal writer. Eloquent Rage, and there's a line she has halfway through the book which says, "White fear is the cultural refuse of white supremacy." And that had me pause a moment, because I think that seems like approximating to what we're talking about now. I realize I'm talking to a room with white folks who are present, right, and accounted for in some way. And one thing I think sometimes we do in movement spaces is that we're really hard on white folks who show up. And in some ways that is connected to the ways in which people are actually behaving. In other ways, I think that's a proxy for all the frustration, disappointment, heartbreak, and powerlessness that comes with all the white folks that they don't have access to, right? So whether it's fear or something of another degree for white folks who show up more consistently and more courageously and get concerned about the perfection of their politics or the purity of their politics, I do think movement spaces can be kinder to white folks who are showing up in some ways. At the same time, one thing that I'm appreciating more to have more language for is understanding just the lethalness of white fear, right? So we often talk about that in terms of just the context of police and people of color. And I'm really interested in expanding that conversation, because white fear shows up in my world all the time. It's the activist defensiveness, the exclusion to things that people, the policing that happens without the uniform. It's all these other things. And what I think Whitney Cooper's quote is trying to get at is that because so much of that part of the experience is happening at a subtext level, right? Like, it's happening at the level that folks are not directly acknowledging yet. To me, that makes the most, inspires the most fear for me. So to me, it feels deeply important that if I don't know what's under the fear in me, right? And I would like to know, maybe from a distance, I don't know whether it's this protectionism or fear of loss that actually needs to actually be like healthily expressed by grief. Because the end of white supremacy means that white folks will lose things, right? That's a real thing. Is that the source of the fear? Is the fear about these other things that I don't know about yet, but I would like to know?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I think that it's a fear of giving up power, but also a fear of recognizing that what folks have done to people of color, they've actually done to themselves. And so I went to Morgan State, shout out to my HBCUs, studied philosophy. Normally don't quote, that's how me and Nick do each other in our former life. Normally don't quote old like white texts, but I do remember reading this like Hegel text, and it's essentially it was about like the master and slave dialectic, and essentially there was one line that said, whatever the master does to the slave, he does to himself, right? And so I think a fear of giving up is this recognizing that like I've done a ton of really messed up things in the world, and now I have to face the pain that will come by recognizing that I've done that also to myself as well.
Very good. Why is it important for white people to focus on white communities and white spaces?
I almost just want to kind of continue on. I mean, if you don't mind, because something came up for me there about sort of hurting yourself or what you do, and I think like for me a key thing in getting more white folks moved and involved, obviously like the fact that you can't empathize with a Tamir Rice or a Sandra Bland, like there's no freaking excuse for it, and so it's like the healing that needs to happen for us to like reconnect to our humanity is a huge part of whiteness. And went to this speech by Jonathan Metzl, a book called Dying of Whiteness, that shows that white people are literally dying earlier because of their racism. It's literally cutting years off of like months or years off of people's lives. And so I think like there's something deep to unpack there in terms of the ways that racism and white supremacy are hurting us all. And also like Dr. Ibram Kendi and How to Be an Anti-Racist, every chapter is talking about this intersectional need and how anti-racism work needs to be anti-capitalist work. So, you know, fighting for a $15 an hour minimum wage or fighting for healthcare, all these things are, so it's important, I think, for white folks and all folks to make these connections with people who are hurting, because people are hurting and people are angry and they're taking it out on the wrong people.
Yes, thank you.
Actually, let me jump in on that too.
Go ahead.
I'm also reading that book, Dying of Whiteness. And I'm at the beginning of the book where the author's describing, and he's like doing a study of a few states, including rural Missouri. And he's describing that, and he's in a place it's gun country, right? Folks, the entire economy of the town, the culture is really immersed in guns. And he's describing how he starts his time in this town in a support group of people who've lost family members to gun suicides, right? And he begins the book by setting up kind of all the things you need to know. The context is guns kill a lot of white men through suicide, right? And it's the mental gymnastics that folks do in these groups to disconnect the availability of guns and their racialized politics around guns and the literal death of their loved ones is really heartbreaking. Like, I actually feel sad about it, because I'm like, how can that disconnection, you're really invested in that, and I don't understand why. And to me, that gets to everything that we've mentioned here, which is there's human costs, right, to namely people, Black people, Indigenous people, people of color. Human costs to white lives. But I think that's a very point, right? Like, it's the disposability of life that white supremacy does best. So if the loss of life is not going to compel folks to move or shift or struggle, I'm not sure what is, but I'm invested, like all of us, in trying to figure that out. And I think I'd be remiss not to mention, to me, for me in the role that I play too, is that there's something, there's very, very serious spiritual poverty that comes with folks who cannot value life at all. Who are so removed from their own divinity, who don't understand the sanctity of just being, or what being can be. Also, to me, inspires the most fear, perhaps, right, around white supremacy and all the different systems that it encompasses, and the people that, the ways in which parts of us continue to be complicit and invested in it. So it's a question I'm thinking about a lot. I'm inviting more conversation on it.